I'm Anchor Kevin Myers. Welcome back to the 24/7 News Show. And America is still reeling after another set of mass shootings not long ago, leaving over 20 people dead and even more injured. And honestly, before I get into essentially the politics of this, my most sincere condolences to those who lost loved ones in either of these attacks or any other mass shootings. Frankly, they happen all too often. I cannot even imagine what the kind of pain you are going through right now to have someone snatched from you that quickly by something so easily preventable that our government continues to do nothing about. I'm truly sorry for that happening to you, and I can't even begin to imagine what you're going through right now. But besides that, both of these shootings in El Paso and Dayton, and again to those survivors, to those survivors and anyone else affected by it, I'm sure it does not help when politicians on both the left and the right, with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who can't even remember the names of the cities where the most recent mass shootings happened. But that does highlight a larger issue, honestly, when anyone makes a mistake like this. It's insulting to the survivors, of course, but it also highlights how common this is happening, that we're starting to mix up cities so frequently with any sort of gun violence related attack. And let's first get into the political motives of the assailants in both cases. Now, Donald Trump and many other conservatives have attempted to spin this as the left versus the right again, because the El Paso shooter was an admitted white nationalist, a Trump supporter, and in Dayton he was an admitted. He had posted strongly that he was in support of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and he called himself a socialist. I don't remember the details of it. But the clear difference is, let's set aside the social media posts for a moment and look at the actual attacks. Dayton's attack was not politically motivated. El Paso's was. And we know this because of the manifesto left by the attacker. That's how we know that it was attacked. He described how much he despised immigrants. He was a white nationalist. He was a racist. And all of this was detailed in his manifesto. No such piece of evidence exists in the Dayton case. Therefore, it is inaccurate to try to frame this as a left-right issue. That attack was not politically motivated. The attack in El Paso was. Either way, though, the brutality, the problem is, of course, white nationalism is a real problem that we need to begin to deal with, no matter what these idiots say otherwise, like Donald Trump. The biggest issue, though, here is, had there been more restrictions in place, because in both cases these guns were purchased legally, this could have been easily prevented. If you had prevented access to firearms for that white nationalist, this probably wouldn't have happened. If you had prevented access to firearms for the shooter in Dayton, that probably wouldn't have happened. And it is appalling to see this continue to happen again and again, and see our leaders do nothing. Now, that isn't to say though that there might be change. We have March for Our Lives now. Thank God. Yeah, I've heard thank God for the NRA. Screw you. Thank God for March for Our Lives, an organization that has come out as the clear opposition to the NRA in support of common sense gun laws that the majority of American people support. But that hasn't stopped in either the motives or the what is the solution to this problem. That hasn't stopped conservative pundits from being able to spin this and make things up. And let's start off with Tucker Carlson, who, in relation to this white supremacist attack in El Paso, said on his program that white supremacy was a hoax and not a real problem. It's abhorrent to hear this from someone who pretends to be a journalist on a network that calls itself news. To just totally ignore a very real threat in this country. White nationalism is a growing terror threat. Domestic terrorism is a growing issue in this country. And to have a party, the Republican Party, with many of its members, prominent members, including the President of the United States, who refuse to acknowledge that this is a real problem, or who try to conflate things like Antifa to the KKK, which does not make any sense. Now, yes, Antifa is brutal, but they are a anti-fascist group, so the motive is good. Their actions in response to it may be a little over the top, but they're anti-Nazi, whereas on the other side, the KKK are literal white supremacists. There is no comparison between the two groups. One is a violent liberal faction that is trying to, defend the people, but maybe goes a little too far. The other side is literal racists. But But to try to conflate all these things as just the left versus the right, it is wrong. And to pretend like white supremacy isn't a real terror threat in this country is wrong. And to all of you Republicans who are ignoring the terror threat of white supremacy, you don't care about Americans because you pretended to after 9/11. A brutal terrorist attack by radical Muslim groups. That was true. It just was. But it is just as true that this was a white supremacist attack, a racially motivated attack. And if you refuse to acknowledge that, then it's clear that 9/11 was never really about helping the American people. It was about putting Muslim people in jail because you're a racist. So that it's transparent because any terror threat to America should be something that is met with harsh opposition. Something that there are demands for being stopped immediately by politicians who are doing everything in their power to prevent any sort of terror threat, whether it's by a white or a brown person, from happening again. And seeing comments like this is appalling. And besides that, we also have, let's just run the clip.
I have been calling for a long time. Every school, secure the perimeter of those schools. Equip them with retired police and military. They should be on every floor of every school. We could do that with stores. We can do that in malls. We can do that pretty much anywhere the public is. Courthouses. We can expand that out everywhere.
So, yeah, to bring this back to gun control, Sean Hannity, self-admitted, gun carrier, best described as an agent of the NRA. He is a morally repugnant human being who continues to go on his show night after night on a network that pretends to call itself news and profess all sorts of racism and conspiracy theories and has the audacity to criticize other outlets for spreading misinformation, despite that he is probably the lead source at Fox, which is a pretty high bar, or it's tough competition to be the biggest liar on Fox. But somehow he does it, and it is disgusting. It's honestly ridiculous in this clip that I really should get to now. He's advocating for a military state. That's what he's describing. Armed military personnel, that he says that in the clip, on every corner. Like, where are we living in? Are we living in a dictatorship? Is this North Korea? Is this, Nazi Germany during World War II? No. The solution is not putting armed guards on every single corner. It's taking the guns away from the people who should never have them and adding protections in place to prevent those people from ever getting guns in the first place. So that's an important part of this, and he is clearly ignoring it. And the biggest frustrating part with Sean Hannity in this particular issue is people like him, these conservatives who say no gun control at all, they say that they need to have their firearms because the Constitution is guaranteed that they have the right to overthrow the government, essentially, if they see fit. Essentially, if they think the government is overreaching too far. That's the argument they're making is, I need my gun to overthrow the government. I hear it a surprising amount of time in YouTube comments, on Fox News, on other conservative outlets. And it's ridiculous to begin with. But I'm going to entertain it just for now to show how ridiculous this is. Because, okay, fine, we'll play your little game where you might need to overthrow the government, okay? Which most likely would be just having a Democratic president again, because these people have such a skewed view of what is actually, authoritarianism. But, so let's say for a moment that you need to do that. If there's a military state in place now, where there's armed guards in every mall, on every street, every corner, every house, every school, whatever, if that's the kind of place we're living in, how are you going to overthrow the government then if the army is everywhere? That's not going to work. So to even go after the craziest arguments, it doesn't make sense. Like the armed situation, it doesn't work. We look at the Parkland shooting where there was a cop on duty who ran away. And yes, that was awful. And people tried to blame him specifically rather than the overall problem of gun control. And thank God for March for Our Lives, for real. Because those students, they stood up, they said, no, we do not want your thoughts and prayers. We want you to take action. And March for Our Lives was born as a movement that continues to this day as a front, an opposition group to the NRA to protect the American citizens. And that is important because the NRA represents the gun companies. They're an industry lobbying group at best. And they're never going to admit that, maybe we need some common sense gun control. They're in support of selling as many firearms as possible. And if you add any sort of protections in place that might make it a little bit harder for someone else to obtain a weapon, then that cuts into the sales of these firearm companies like Smith & Wesson and numerous others. And it's appalling to see. this kind of thing continuing to happen where we just ignore the problem and look for literally any other solution, whether it's video games, like Trump said, which is ridiculous. Because the fact of the matter is, we're the only first world country with this big of a mass shooting problem. It's not an issue in Australia. They passed gun control over 20 years ago and haven't had a single mass shooting since. In the UK, they don't have this problem. They don't have this problem in numerous other countries. And New Zealand recently passed gun control, so they're not really, it hasn't been in place long enough to really be a case study yet. But it's still an important point to make, that other countries have made this shift, have recognized this is the problem, we needed to deal with it. The issue is not video games. Australia has video games. The UK has video games. And if anything, I would argue those are a positive good in this circumstance, not an evil, because it gives an outlet for someone to take out their aggression rather than do it in real life. So I would argue that the virtual world, if anything, is only a good thing in this situation, not a bad thing. That's my position on video games. But honestly, I don't play that much video games. I don't really care about that particular issue, but it's stupid to try to look for literally any other reason. And I've even heard as far as people saying, you know, it's LGBTQ people. Like, what is wrong with you? I mean, why do you think... No, there's something wrong with you if you think that LGBTQ people are somehow responsible for mass shootings. I've heard this argument before. I shouldn't entertain it, honestly. But I've heard it. It's ridiculous. It is morally wrong. But to think, like, I can't think of a single situation where a mass shooter was LGBTQ in any case. I can't think of one. So essentially, by making that argument, you're defending the mass shooter because it's someone who likely is a hyper-conservative, like in El Paso. Overall, there's something seriously wrong with this country. There's something seriously broken that needs to be fixed. But finally, this takes me to my final point. The NRA singled out 2020 election candidate Kamala Harris. This is according to CNN. They went after her, calling her proposed gun legislation ridiculous. And you know what? To you, NRA members, you just inadvertently elected Kamala Harris the 46th president of the United States. Because you know what? No one on the left, no decent human being cares what the NRA thinks about this. An endorsement from the NRA is a death sentence for a political candidate. And a slam by the NRA is a gift from God. So, like, your opinion, you going after a Democratic candidate is only going to boost their numbers. Anyone who was on the fence about Kamala before is like, I don't know. There's some things I like about her, but there's some things I don't. The NRA, you know what you just did? You pushed them over the edge. Now they're going to want to vote for her. So, and she's a top 5, candidate. She's not, Biden is still leading the polls, but, and all the candidates have come out, against the NRA, and have been very proud of their D- and F ratings by the NRA, which, are we really going to allow the National Redneck Association to assign grades to liberal politicians? You guys probably can't even count to 10. Which would explain why you don't understand how mass shootings are such a big problem. You can't even count the number of victims that you're responsible for. Anyway, once again, though, after this sort of somewhat more composed rant than usual, again, my sincerest condolences to the victims of these mass shootings. I can't imagine what you're going through. But something definitely needs to be done. If this isn't politicizing it, this shouldn't be a left-right issue. Everyone should be in favor of something so obvious. It's gun control. That's what we need. We need background checks. We need, at the bare minimum, even some Republicans to come out in support of red flag laws, being able to take firearms away from people who've been deemed to be a threat to themselves or others. Because again, the problem, it's not mental illness, it's not video games, it's the guns.